Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. Hope you're having a great day. Hope you guys get a chance to tune in. Getting ready to do our midday devotional. Excited for what God has been speaking to me throughout this week and what we have going on in the church. We have a great opportunity to just simply be the church, to live in a way that is worthy of the calling that God has placed upon our heart and our life. And for that, we are gratefully blessed and the opportunity we have as a church to continue to move forward and grow together. Yesterday, I made the encouragement that we would take this time of isolation or social distancing, sheltering in place, whatever they want to call it, to grow in our relationship with Christ. And not just to grow in our relationship with Christ, but to also grow in our relationship with Christ together as a family, so that when we come out the other side of this stuff that's going on, it would be a great blessing, not just to us, but to the world around us. All right, so today, let's get started into our devotional. And so, as I said, I'm excited for what God's been speaking to me. And I found myself over the past little bit diving into several different passages, all relating to very similar concepts. But this afternoon, we're going to jump into what I've been reading into Hebrews. And Hebrews is one of my favorite books in the Bible. So if you're following along with me, you can jump into Hebrews chapter 12, looking at the first two verses there. All right? So, join me. It says, "Therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us lay aside every weight and sin which clings so closely, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us." And so that's the very beginning of this passage, and we're going to jump into more of it. But like every single Bible study that you do, no matter what you're reading, you always want to make sure of the context that is surrounding it. So, verse 1, "Therefore, since we're surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses." So, this book, Hebrews, was written to an audience that was undergoing persecution. And so this persecution that they were facing was one of the first that had happened in the early church. So the author of Hebrews, which, to be honest with you, we don't really know who it is yet, but some think it's Paul, side note, he is writing to encourage them in the midst of the persecution that they are facing, and also in the midst of persecution that is coming. You see, there's been some orders that have been brought down, and so persecution is on the way. Persecution looked like sometimes you would be crucified, sometimes you'd be thrown out of the city and no longer allowed to socialize. Anyway, so there was stuff that was going on, a persecution that was coming. And so he's writing to them, he's to encourage them. And so he gets to here and he says, "Therefore, since we're surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses." And so in order to know who those witnesses are, we got to also be reading in the rest of the book. So Hebrews 11 tells us who those witnesses are that he's referring to. And so if you were to flip back to chapter 11, you would see that this is the faith chapter we call. This is the list of those people who have gone before in the faith and are champions of the faith, if you will. And so he goes through and talks about all of these different people. And so when he's talking about this cloud of witnesses, he's referring to them. So he's referring to Abraham. He says, "By faith, Abraham obeyed when he was called to go out to a place that he was to receive as an inheritance." You see, we know that Abraham was simply called to go to a place that he'd never been, and he obeyed and walked in that. And then we get down to Moses and talks about how Moses did all these great things, and he was consistently walking according to the direction that God had given to him, and he was very faithful in that. And so when he's talking about this great cloud of witnesses, he's speaking to those people who have gone before in the faith. Those people that we can look back, we can read back and see how God has indeed been faithful to his people. And that's a good word for us today. So these witnesses that he's referring to are those who are champions of the faith, those ones who have done great things before us, so we can know that God is indeed one that can be trusted. And that's a great testimony for us today in the coronavirus thing, the challenges that we got going on, that we can remember, we can know that God can be trusted and that he is faithful. So the picture that the author here is referring to is he's referring to a picture, a stadium, picture a sporting event. If you've ever been to a sporting event, which I guarantee most of us have, been to a sporting event, and so the picture that he's proclaiming there is one that you are a spectator, and that there's spectators all around us. And they're sitting in this stadium, and they're cheering us on. These champions of the faith are cheering us on. Not in the sense of a spectator like we're used to. Like if we were to go to a sporting event and we're sitting there cheering on the spectators, or we're cheering on the athletes and we're a spectator. We're watching these professional athletes play. Of course, sporting events are going on and probably may not be going on for a little while. But one of my favorite things to do is go down and watch a baseball game and cheer on the athletes. It's a lot of fun. But not in the respect that they're talking. The author is not referring to the idea of that they are witnessing us, or that they are cheering us on, but they are our witnesses, and that they testify to God's protection, God's strength, God's faithfulness, over and over and over again. And so that's a key component to this. Some would look at it as these witnesses are ministering to us, or interceding for us, or praying for us, that we can be praying to these witnesses. But this is really just speaking to you can see and testify, or they can testify to what God does on our behalf. All right, so those are the ones that have stood the test of time, and that we know that they have received the medal, that God's gold medal, if you will. They have stood on victory, and we can trust that victory is indeed ours as well, because we've seen how God has been faithful, and He has worked out that in them. They're examples of faith to us. They remind us that through God we can accomplish all of what God has called us to do. And so that is an exciting aspect to this. And I've been thinking back through in my life, in my experiences, and I know in my faith walk, in my faith journey, I've experienced many who have been a cloud of witnesses. They've shown me, or they pointed to the fact that God is indeed faithful and He can be trusted. And I'm thankful for those. And I'm sure you out there have one as well. If you got one, feel free to write those down inside the comments and give them a shout out for the ways in which that they have spoken to you and shown to you God's faithfulness. And so we are 2,000 years removed from that. Okay, so this book was written just about 2,000 years ago, and so we're 2,000 years removed from that. And so we have an even greater cloud of witnesses that are surrounding us. We've been able to see God's testimony, God's faithfulness over and over again. And so, I'm a history guy. I love history. I love diving in and reading about these champions of the faith. So, I think of like this cloud of witnesses that we have. I think of Augustine, and I think of Athanasius and Gregory of Nazianzus. And those are some of the older guys, some big names there that if you were to read about in church history, you'd see their names pop up and the great things they did. And we think of Martin Luther and John Wesley, and even contemporary, just passed away, Billy Graham. These great champions of the faith that we can look to, and we can see over and over again that God is faithful, that God fulfills His promises, and He is always there for us. I believe that what this says is that, I believe the saying that God, that we've used over and over again, is that God doesn't call the equipped, but He equips the called. And we can see that over and over again. If you read through Hebrews chapter 11, you can see where the people that He called and He used were broken. They weren't perfect, but yet with God they could do great things. And I know that is true in my life, and it's true in your life as well. And so I got this idea, while sitting here in my Lazy Boy. It's old, it's stained, it's ripped, it's ugly. In fact, it's not even allowed in my house anymore, because it's just, it doesn't quite meet up with the standard we have with our furniture. You know what I mean? We're all married, and we all have our special chairs we like to sit in, but yet for me, I like it. I keep it. It's comfy, and it serves as a reminder of the great cloud of witnesses that have gone before. You see, this was Jeanette's great-grandfather, Milner's chair, and he was a very faithful, very good Nazarene pastor. And so he led in a way that was very, very impactful in the community around him and within his own family. And so as I sit in this chair and as I read and I study, it brings back the reminder of the faithfulness that God has and the impact that it has when we walk in his faithfulness and we serve as a champion of the faith, and the impact that it has on those around us. So so the impact that he had on his family. So if you look at his family, I get the benefit of it. See, I married Jeanette, his great-granddaughter, who comes from a family of faith. Many are still serving. Most of which in the family are followers of Christ today, have gone on to be pastors and leaders and within the church. And so that is the sort of testimony that is there, that when you walk according to God's direction, it has great dividends, not just for today, but also for the future of your family. So the focus, however, when you read this passage, says, "Therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us lay aside every weight and sin which clings so closely, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us." See, that the focus is not that part. The focus is what comes next in verse 2. "Looking to Jesus, the founder and perfecter of our faith, who for joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising shame, and is seated at the right hand of the throne of God." You see, the focus of the passage is not the great cloud of witnesses, but it is the person that is acting within the great cloud of witness, the person that is the worker in the worker, the person that is giving the power that transforms the normal people into effective workers for Christ. And that is Jesus Christ. He is the founder and perfecter of our faith. You see, he says here, so that while you run this race, we're to run this race, we're to look to Jesus, who is the perfecter, who has already run that race. He's already crossed the finish line, and he's made a way for us to also run the race with him. Not just with him, but to run the same race that he ran. Jesus is there in heaven. He's waiting for us at the finish line. He's waiting to congratulate us and say, "Well done, my good and faithful servant. You were faithful in the race that I've called you to run." Man, that is something that is very encouraging and exciting for me to think about, how Jesus is there. And because he has already went ahead, he has already run the race. We have to remember that this race that he's called us to run is not one we run on our own, but run under his authority, his power. He ran in a perfect way, modeling for us and making way for us to get to the finish line, so that we can also strive to run the same race as Jesus. Zach shared a story in his sermon a little bit ago about the 4-minute mile. And I'm going to rip it off because it's pretty good and it fits with this very well. And there's a story of a gentleman, for a very long time it was said that no one it was humanly impossible to run a sub 4-minute mile. And so within that, people began to just kind of believe that. And so for a very long time, nobody could run a sub 4-minute mile. And then I don't know the name because it's not my story, but I didn't read it myself. I just got it secondhand. But the one gentleman said, I think I can do it. And so he began envisioning, began seeing himself running a sub 4-minute mile. And over some time, he was able to accomplish it. He was able to accomplish that which was impossible and thought to be impossible, but yet he accomplished it. And then after he had accomplished it, within I think 10 years, there was like 15 or 20 people who had done it after that. You see, what we believe is impossible is possible. We just don't realize. And when we have Jesus in our life, it is impossible. And this passage shares with us how we can run that race and how we can lead in our households and how we can leave a legacy of faith. It says here that we are to lay aside every weight. It says, since we're surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us lay aside every weight. And the picture here is, hey, John, good to see you today. So I'm going to jump back in. So he says that we're to lay aside every weight. Now, picture with me, you are a first century runner. Okay, so you're running a marathon, and now just picture the clothes that you might envision someone in the first century wearing. I know this isn't politically correct, but it's kind of like a dress. They call it a tunic. You would wear it, and it would be long. It would hang down almost all the way to your feet, touching the ground. And so, could you imagine trying to run with a tunic on, a heavy tunic, and it was dragging around your feet? And that's why it says that you're to remove or to lay aside every weight when you go to run. which makes total sense, doesn't it? Because you can't run very fast or very well in a dress or in a large tunic. It's almost impossible. So the vision that the author here is drawn upon is when they would run, they would strip down basically to their underwear. We would call them shorts today, but back then they didn't really have individual leg holes, and so they would run pretty much in underwear, which is quite interesting when you think about it, because what this passage is saying is get rid of everything that is weighty, get rid of everything that is excess. So what does that look like today? It means setting aside time to get with God and say, God, what is there in this world that is distracting me from you? Well, maybe it's Facebook. Maybe you spend too much time on Facebook. Maybe it's entertainment. Maybe you're binge watching Netflix. Maybe you're just diving in and you're spending 6 hours binge watching Netflix. I don't know what it is for you, but those distractions that so easily get us distracted from what God is trying to speak to us and what He's trying to encourage us and what He's called us to do, to be leaders in our household and leave a legacy of faith. He's saying to get rid of those distractions and put your attention to what is essential and what is important. Now it also then says to lay aside every weight and sin which clings so closely. You notice here the author, he doesn't say what that sin is. He just simply labels it as sin. In other words, all sin is what gets in our way and trips us up. So picture that tunic. And so those tunics would be, well, could you imagine trying to run? It would wrap around your feet and trip you up, right? That's why they would take them off. So you get rid of all the distractions, and at the same time, you would also have tripped up by this sin that comes up into your life. Sin is like a little disease that grasps a hold of you. It makes it so when you try to run, try to move, that it just entangles you so much that you're not effective in your run. You're not effective in the race that you've been called to run. And so he says is to get rid of that, to get rid of that sin in your life, to completely lay it aside. Some of the conversations are great. Jesse is definitely a rock star. We love having Jesse. Jesse's going to help us with our podcast, but our Facebook and all of our live video streaming. So, thank you, Jesse. Got the new camera in today. Your job is to get it rocking and rolling, so I hope you see this. So looking to Jesus, the founder, perfecter of our faith, who for joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and is seated at the right hand of God in the throne of God. What a great testimony that is to us and how great God is for each one of us. And He gives us the ability, the authority, and the power to run the race that He has set aside for us. So what does that look like today? I've already kind of given you the outline. First, see if there's any distractions in your life. What is it that is weighing you down? Or what is it that is pulling you away from God? In many respects, it can be hidden sin that is in your life. And that's where you need to get in community with people. Get in relationships with others that they can pull you closer to God by helping to point those things out in your life. And simply getting alone with God. Let Him speak to you. And then you can be able to then run the race that He's called you to run, and to run it effectively. Not weighted down, not tripping, not falling, not constantly getting beaten up by all of the failures and the distractions in life. But you can run completely unencumbered. I know it's not a word people use today, but unencumbered. Nothing's getting in your way. That you can run the race that God's called you to run. So over these next few weeks, I'm encouraging you to get that figured out, and then at the same time begin to lead in your household. Okay? Tonight we are doing a online small group. First for us, maybe a first for you. And so we're encouraging you, if you see this video, you want to get in a relationship and community and grow in your understanding of Christ and place Him first in your life. Tonight we're doing that tonight in the online small group. And so if you want to be a part of that, just message us at the church. We'll add you to the group. We're going live at 7 p.m., time of community, time of prayer, and time of diving into God's Word. We're diving in, trying to get prepared for Easter. And we don't know what our Easter plans are. If Trump has anything to do with it, we'll be back to normal by Easter. We don't know yet, but we're getting ready for Easter and setting aside some time to encounter him. And so we're looking at Luke and his description, his lead up to what takes place on Easter. And so if you want to be part of that, join us, send us a message so we know that you want to be part of it. Be blessed. Dive into God's word. Spend some time with your family. Lead well and serve well in this time. And the opportunity that God has presented to us. We've had a lot of those distractions removed for us, if you will. And so now take advantage of that. Press into God and let him speak to you. Have a great and blessed rest of your day.